Are you looking for better health but feel a little overwhelmed with it all, thinking there might be something missing? Maybe you're looking for action steps to take that get to the real root of the issue and actually move the needle in your health. Here on the Cornerstone Integrative Healing Podcast, we will share the link between our physical, emotional, and spiritual health, all while pointing you to the one and only true healer, Jesus. I'm Kari, Coody, your co-host. As a pharmacist turned integrative health practitioner, I spent 20 years in the traditional healthcare world, and it was definitely long enough to know there's a huge need for preventative healthcare and holistic healing. I'm excited to have conversations around these topics with my co-host and friend, Jenn.
Hey, I'm Jenn Patriarca. God gave me this desire to help others with natural healing a long time ago. With more than 20 years of experience in the functional nutrition field, God decided it was time to join forces. Kari and I are colleagues turned faithful partners in this mission God has put on our hearts. A mission for true healing, one that encompasses an integrative approach. With Jesus taking the lead, our aim is to point you toward Him as we help you peel back the layers. Through conversations, you can expect straightforward information on holistic health topics that include physical, emotional, and spiritual action steps that will create real change in your health, and honest conversations around the ups and downs that can come with healing. It's time to have joy in your life again and the energy to do all that God has called you to. Be sure to subscribe for new episodes every Monday.
Hello, and welcome back into the Cornerstone Integrative Healing Podcast. I'm Kari here with my co-host, Jenn, and we're continuing the series all about the emotion-organ connection. We're explaining some of those that are sort of more common and sharing the links between the physical and the emotional. And we're on episode 10. And so if you've missed any of that we've done, you can always go back and kind of catch up. And we did one episode that was sort of an overview, if you will. So if you're kind of newer, you might want to go back and check that one out. But we are talking about the interesting link between complaining and blood sugar today. So if you're like, I don't get it, then just
Stick around.
Stick around for this episode because we are going to be talking about the pancreas. And we are going to be sharing a good bit about blood sugar as well, and just sort of how all of that connects the physical, but then of course there's that emotional component too. So Jenn, do you want to start off just by sharing a little bit about the pancreas and what it does?
Absolutely. So our pancreas, one of its main jobs is to produce insulin. Of course, insulin is something that helps us move glucose into the cell. So when we eat, of course, we free up glucose or simple sugars, and we need to get those sugars into the cell. And insulin is one of the ways that we shuttle it into the cell and make it usable. And so, one of the first things that we always talk about with blood sugar is just making sure that we're keeping our, insulin levels stable. And we do that by eating balanced meals, right, Kari? Yeah. Protein, fat, complex carbs. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about, which not a lot of people mention, but I've learned through my years when I was working with standard process, is that one of the main thing that actually damages beta cells are the cells that produce insulin, is bleached flour. It actually creates this chemical and it damages beta cells. In fact, when they first started bleaching flour, I don't know when, but, I would say at least 100 years ago, they started bleaching flour. And they did that so that, basically so bread could sit on the shelf longer, right? Because the bran, not the germ wouldn't go rancid.
Yeah.
And so it could just sit on the shelf. The problem is when you bleach flour, it causes damage to the beta cells. And back then, the founder of Standard Process talked about how you're going to have, if you keep bleaching flour, you're going to have epidemic rates of diabetes.
Which is,
here we are.
Right.
So pancreas, yes, absolutely important to help us utilize our glucose. Do you want to talk or at least dive us into blood sugar and how that relates to so many aspects of our health and the stress response?
Of course. Yeah. Another thing that the pancreas says that, honestly, I hadn't not thought that much about. I mean, I knew this, but then I'd forgotten about it, is it gives us digestive enzymes. And so
Oh, right.
that's just a super key piece with the pancreas that is often overlooked because a lot of times we do more so focus on like bile and the gallbladder liver that we talked about in the last episode. But pancreas is super key for digestive enzymes, which obviously is part of the digestive process, which is so flawed in so many people. So this is just another link to that. But I mean, I would say obviously mainly blood sugar, but that's definitely a piece. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that was kind of a piece in my story, my digestive story.
That's a huge piece, by the way, that
Yeah.
I started moving on before we even
No,
talked
it's
about.
okay.
But yes, yeah, the release of, lipase and amylase and what's the protein enzyme? Oh, it's leaving me right now. But anyway,
It's okay.
sorry about that. You absolutely need all those enzymes. As I mentioned, if you listen to the previous podcast, that's part of the alkalizing that chyme, and really, of course, supporting digestion, as Kari just said.
Yeah. And so
Huge,
many people
huge piece.
do take digestive enzymes, which they're needed in so many different cases. However, it kind of goes back to, again, like, why do we continue to need those? And as far as they're really helpful, but like, we kind of want to fix the reason why we don't have enough of those digestive enzymes. So that's just, again, supplements are so helpful, but to continue to need them year after year after year, you really have to, be getting to the root of the issue so that digestion and your all of your systems work together. But back to the blood sugar, actually before that, sorry. I do want to just touch on the fact that so often I feel like we kind of focus on some of the downstream effects of an upstream problem. And, I'm just thinking about like, if we only focus on maybe what's off in our gut, or we focus on hormones, or we focus on thyroid, hormone, or, things like that, as far as just taking one piece of health and only focusing on, what the levels are and, trying to support those only, we kind of miss.
Go ahead. Sorry, Kari. No, go
You're
ahead.
right. Yeah. And so we kind of have to think versus, only focusing on what's off. Why is it off in the first place? And then that just leads you back to the organ, because if you think about the way it all works together is sort of like a symphony. The endocrine system is the symphony. And so there are different composers that write messages, like the hypothalamus, the pituitary, the pineal gland. But the orchestra is, it's just.
By the way, those are upstream. Let me interrupt you because you said upstream and downstream.
I'm sorry. Yes.
That's
right.
Okay. I just want to explain that to the listeners because they might not understand upstream. So hypothalamus, pituitary, pineal, those Kari just mentions, those are what we're talking about when we talk about upstream.
Right. And it's kind of thinking about the messenger versus the messages. So the messengers are the organs and they produce the messages, which are hormones and different things such as that. And so that's kind of the idea that we're talking about when we talk about these organs, is you really want to get to some of the more upstream issues that cause the downstream things that we kind of more so want to focus on, but we leave off what's actually causing them. So hopefully that makes sense in like a big picture view. But going back to the pancreas and specifically blood sugar, again, I know we talked about common things that we see with clients. This is definitely a common thing that we see with clients, right? Blood sugar affects so many different things, so many. And a lot of the maybe the symptoms that we feel, as far as even like irritability and mood stability and things like that, are 100% usually a blood sugar issue. And so really starting there with creating, this rebuilding, honestly, your foundation, blood sugar is super important when you think about that. And I think so often, we see the fact that we don't really put two and two together as far as the symptoms that we're feeling and then our blood sugar. But then we also maybe just want to take a supplement for it. But you cannot out supplement your diet when it comes to this. There's just no way possible. Right, Jenn?
No, and I can't stress enough, and I'm sure Kari would agree that this is probably one of the main things that people stress unknowingly. They stress their
Yeah.
blood sugar by drinking caffeine on an empty stomach first thing in the morning, or, intermittent fasting, which in a lot of situations can be really good. I like intermittent fasting, but it's not good for everybody. Or if you're, running 100 miles an hour every day, you're constantly stressing that fuel pump, which is your blood sugar, right? Because if you're stressed and cortisol is high, cortisol tells the body, it initiates a process so that you release stored glucose from the liver, the glycogen. Because if you're stressed, the body thinks it needs to get out of the way of the saber-toothed tiger. And so it needs blood sugar to do that.
Yeah.
And so it's one of the systems that we see that is so often abused and stressed, and that can not easily, but adjusted pretty simply. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do agree. And I honestly think that you kind of have to start. Obviously, it's just really important to think about how you're starting your morning, because a lot of times it's just like if we don't start our morning off right with, eating within 60 minutes of waking and eating enough protein, carbs, and fat together, we're constantly playing catch up. And so that's why so many people crave certain things in the afternoons and they're feeling tired or they're feeling irritable. That is your blood sugar. That's your body responding. It's giving you messages. And so I know it can be just super overwhelming to know where to start. If you don't do anything else, eating within an hour of waking is 100% where I would start. Would you not agree?
Yes. 100%. And then eating every 3 to 4 hours after,
Yes.
especially if you have fatigue and energy issues,
Yeah.
because it can be as simple as your fuel pump is not working correctly. And so if you feed that fuel pump consistently, you can stabilize a lot of your energy.
And some people, we put the range of 3 to 4 hours. If you find yourself needing to eat more often throughout the day, it's just your body telling you can't maintain your blood sugar, or you're not eating enough protein or the right, mix of protein, fat and carbs. But that's all messages that your body is sending you. So I do think part of this is just not ignoring the messages, right? It can be as simple as that.
And most people do. And I'm not excluding myself.
Yeah.
I am super guilty of this. When I was younger and didn't understand the importance of glucose, I would, sometimes not eat all day and then, be ravenous at night. And I couldn't understand why. And it was because my body was trying to catch up. So, if you find yourself standing in front of the pantry at 9:00, it's probably most likely because you probably haven't eaten enough during the day.
Right. Yeah. And I just think this is key to so many different things. And it just makes me think of like weight loss, how so many people, they want to lose weight. And so they restrict what they eat. And that's actually the opposite of what your body would need to come back into balance and get to a natural weight, a weight that it that it's is good at. Because when your body is constantly in this fight or flight mode, it doesn't feel safe. And so it is going to hold on to more weight because it doesn't feel safe that it's going to get meals throughout the day that it needs. Right. So that's super key. If you're just thinking like, I don't know why I can't lose weight, you might not be eating enough and you might not be eating frequently enough throughout the day.
Amen. Yeah. And there's two extremes. So we're talking mostly about hypoglycemia or maybe low blood sugar. But also, obviously, as we age too, because of vascular changes and we're not getting insulin to the cell maybe as consistently or as well, we tend to have higher blood glucose, right, as we age. For lots of reasons. One, because we've been stressed a lot of our life. And so we're constantly pumping out that glycogen and fueling the blood sugar through cortisol, through stress. But also, as I mentioned, just because, as we age, those vascular changes, that's why we have decreased circulation and cardiovascular changes. But also with that, you're not getting things to the cell that you normally would. And insulin is one of those. And so there are tips to help you sort of maintain blood sugar, whether, you're low or you're high. And I learned a lot of these tips. I learned from Glucose Goddess. If you aren't familiar with her, she wrote a book. It's amazing. It's a really great read. But she gives you a lot of the science if you do want to dig a little bit deeper. But Kari, do you want to go through some of the tips of, just helping keep your blood sugar stable?
Yeah. I mean, again, top tip is eat within 60 minutes of waking, because I just want to help you to understand if you don't do that, what happens. So, I mean, of course, when we're sleeping and then we get up, our body needs energy. And so, I say within 30 to 60 minutes, that's sort of a good range there. But by 60 minutes, you're going to need energy to, get going, right?
Right.
And
also there's, sorry to interrupt you, but there's also like the first meal effect. So there's good research that says if you have like a really nutritionally dense first meal, you'll have better metabolic activity throughout the whole day, which makes sense, right? Like if you're getting everything you need to fuel those, those organs, of course you're going to, have better metabolic activity. So, but that's been proven. So,
right. Yeah. So if you don't if you don't give your body the fuel that it wants, which is food, then it has to make its own energy, and it has to do that through stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. And so if we've talked about how that's just it makes your blood sugar extremely unstable, and it taxes your adrenals, and it's just a whole cycle that you kind of want to get out of. And it's not like we're not going to have stress throughout the day. However, we want to try to get out of the stress cycle and also give our body fuel in the proper form that it wants, which is the protein, fat, and carb mixture, so that it has all the things that it needs. And so that to me is like the biggest key. That's why intermittent fasting and skipping breakfast and maybe just, drinking coffee, which really intensifies all of the stress hormones and makes, honestly, that whole cycle worse. It's just not a good idea for women, particularly because blood sugar and hormonal balance is super connected. So it's just typically, unless you're just not under a lot of stress otherwise, which is not a lot of us. It's just not a great thing to skip breakfast. So that definitely is key. And then, of course, staying fueled throughout the day every 3 to 4 hours. And with blood sugar, it's really, if you maybe went to the doctor and your A1C is high, or you've had blood sugar issues and you just feel like, oh, I'm just going to cut out carbs. Okay. That it just makes your body have to make its own energy still, right? I get that you might be eating protein and fat. However, your body needs that carb source to maintain a proper glucose, but it needs the protein with it to slow it down, right? So it doesn't spike your blood sugar. So, if you haven't been eating carbs and, trying to maintain that way, I would just encourage you to maybe add them in slowly. And I think that's super key. Complex carbs. Yeah. Yes. Thank you for mentioning that. Complex carbs are super key. Maybe you're like, I am eating carbs, but we're talking about complex carbs like fruits and root vegetables, because they contain fiber, they contain minerals, which are super key when you think about the whole blood sugar, stabilization process. That's a big key right there. So.
Right. And if your blood sugars are running a little bit higher, you can try like a 10-minute walk after meals. So,
yes.
Literally walk up your street for 5 minutes and walk back for 5 minutes. That 10-minute walk, I'm moving those muscles, increasing muscle metabolism will tell the muscles to soak up that glucose. And then apple cider vinegar before meals does the same thing. It just tells the muscles, to soak up the glucose that's coming. So you can do about a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar in water before meals to again, help keep that blood sugar spike down. And then eating your foods in the right order. So eating veggies first. So veggies, obviously with the fiber, will coat the intestines and slow down how glucose is absorbed through the gut. So if you eat your veggies first, then your fats and proteins, and then any starches or complex carbs last, you can significantly decrease your glucose spike.
Yeah. And so, it's not about necessarily being perfect. It's really about seeing where you're at and seeing how you can incorporate some of these things, but realizing this is a big deal. And this is something that is lifelong. I mean, it's like we always want to try to give our body what it needs. And so blood sugar and eating, and it all goes together with so many other health related and mood related things that we sometimes struggle with. And so hopefully some of these tips can help you. But let's talk about the emotion that is kind of associated with what we're talking about. So the interesting link between complaining and blood sugar. So I have a funny story with this. It was actually recently, and my son, when I pick him up every day in the afternoon, he just gets in the car and starts complaining. And excuse me. And like it was just on my nerves. Like I was like, why do you get in the car every day and complain? Like I'm over this, and one day I was just really over it. And God just like, it's like he tapped me on the shoulder and was just like, you do the same thing. And I was like, what?
Ooh.
I know, stepped all over my toes.
Oh.
But I realized I might not complain outwardly, but I was complaining inwardly about like, just in my mind, like, why does he always do this? Or why does this have to happen? And yeah, it was just a real big wake up moment for me. And so I just, prayed about it, and I just was like trying to repent from it. And I just felt like I wanted to Google what is the opposite of complaining, because like, honestly, like I don't know how to stop complaining, right? Like in my self-sufficiency. So I'm like, Lord, you got to help me. And so I Googled it, and sure enough, the opposite of complaining is praise. So I just have really been focused on like gratitude and just realizing that like, everything that happens is for a reason, and just really trying to focus on that versus trying to stop complaining, because then it's almost like you just focus on it more and then you complain more. So, and two, with the complaining and with my digestive issues, I've struggled with constipation. And so those digestive enzymes are super key that I'm probably missing from my pancreas if it's just not working properly. So it was just a big aha moment for me. So and it's a journey. Like I'm still really trying to focus, and it takes intention. Like I'm trying to focus more on gratitude every single day.
Yeah. And don't you think it helps? Obviously, Kari, you started taking digestive enzymes, pancreatic enzymes, and to support the pancreas. I just want to remind people, like when you support the physical, you're supporting the emotional and technically the spiritual too, because that's how the body works in coordination, right? So the gland is functioning better, and maybe you won't have a tendency to complain as much because the pancreas is working sufficiently, and vice versa, right? If you're always complaining, you might tend to see to have problems with that organ, in this case, the pancreas. And so if you're working, that's why we're spending so much time explaining the emotions and the physical side of the, the connection to the physical side of the organ, because ideally you want to work on both sides. That's where you're going to get really the true healing.
Right. And I mean, I was just thinking about this morning. I knew we were going to be recording this podcast, and it just dawned on me, like, obviously, if we're more focused on the positive, we're more relaxed. That's huge with digestion.
Right.
It's like, duh.
Right.
But I don't know. I'm just super thankful for, all that the Lord keeps revealing. And as we kind of wrap up, I just wanted to share an oil that has really helped me with this, and it's wild orange. Wild orange is it's the oil of abundance. And sometimes I find myself complaining or just thinking in a scarcity mindset. Those two kind of go hand in hand, I feel. And so wild orange is just really, something that I've kind of felt drawn to. And so just diffusing it or inhaling it, it smells really good. And it's just kind of just a bright, cheery oil that helps you to be able to just feel more positive and happy.
Yeah. And that's the emotional side. Thanks for that, Kari. But I wanted to say the physical side too. There are some nutrients that are super important to just sensitize the insulin receptor. So things like magnesium and zinc and fish oil, omega-3s specifically, glucose tolerance factor, which most people aren't familiar with that term, but they could be familiar with the term chromium. So, glucose tolerance factor is just the natural elemental chromium. And then sodium. Sodium helps to sensitize insulin receptors. So those are just some of the nutrients that are super key to just support overall pancreas health.
Yeah. So as we wind up, I just thought it would be good to end with a verse. This one's from Psalm 95. It says, "O come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come into his presence with thanksgiving, and let us make a joyful noise to him with songs of praise." And so that's one reason why I have praise music going a lot, because it just keeps you in that mindset of praise. And if you're praising, you have a lot less tendency to complain about things. And it just helps to shift my mindset, even just to looking at what he is doing versus what I can't see or what he's not done yet. So
Amen.
we hope this helps. Let us know. Let us know if you try some of these things and your experience with them, or if you have questions. Of course, we're always here for that. But we hope you've been enjoying this series as well. This is just something that we feel really led to do. And we would always love to hear from you what your experience has been.
Or how we can pray for you. If we can pray for you around this subject, obviously complaining, or maybe the last podcast we talked about resentment, and that's a hard one too. If there's somehow we can specifically pray for you, we would love to do that. So reach out.
Yes, for sure. We will see you guys on the next episode.